Alrighty then, so here's the cover for the barbette. I cut it out and I started to fit it, and partially it goes right around that teardrop shape. And what I found was, and it's probably because I used 1/16 balsa, is that everything's a little higher than it should be, and I cannot get this to wrap around and actually be flush all the way around. So I'll get one side, but the other side won't be, and I'll have a space there. And so I decided, I could have pulled the guns off and tried to sand them down, but I thought, I'll just go upstairs in the copier. And I just copied these things 105 and 110. Turns out 105% worked. So just a tiny bit bigger. And the idea is hopefully that will fit over and not look silly. There's one side I did, and I don't think it looks bad. It covers, everything's fine. It's a toy-like in how it moves a little bit, so there's some space there, but nothing terrible, especially when it's all done and it'll be painted. It'll look pretty cool, so I don't think it looks terribly out of scale. It's a little steampunkish, maybe, if it's a little bit bigger than it needs to be, but it's not that different, and now it fits. So all I did was very carefully cut this other barbette out, and you just make sure you cut all those relief marks and make sure everything is nice and perfecto. And then I started using my little round tools, and I started trying to shape this thing. So you can see there's a little bit of a baby petal design on the leading edge up there. And then those pieces have to be folded between each other so that they're going to end up actually gluing together. So a lot of this is using different size little round tools in order to try to get this thing to look good. And it's just a lot of futzing around. When I get it close, I added some glue with an old X-Acto blade to that little tab, and then I folded these two together, and once they started to dry, clinched them shut. So that gets you sort of the base, that gets you sort of started as to what the barbette is supposed to look like. And then it's a matter of shaping it some more. And you do a lot of this because you're trying to make a flat piece that will go over that teardrop. And so the paper will form, and probably the kit paper formed even better than what I'm using, but it still worked. And you can see I'm kind of just tweaking it, trying to sort of hint as to how it's supposed to go. And now I'm going to start to tackle those little pedals, which this wasn't as bad as doing a pedal like on a spinner or something. This actually worked pretty well. I might still fill them in a little and sand them before I prime and paint ultimately, but these actually turned out okay. So now it's a matter of trying to get those together. So I add little bits of glue, and then I take tweezers and hold things together, and basically they're edge glued in there. I could use pieces of paper as ways to hold it, which would be a smart idea. But what I tend to do is use um, I use my thick super glue instead of the paper to get it into the right place. So I got it kind of there, and then I add a little thick super glue and smear it in there. Smooth it off with my finger, and then go back and hit it with a little zip kicker, and that holds it in place kind of quickly. And then I'm able to do some more shaping. But one side is done, and then I start working on the other side. And it just takes patience. This is a long video. It's about a half hour almost, but it's because I want to show you some stuff to make you see that, um, how long these things take and how you have to be patient with them. And you might, if you watch part of it, get an idea how to do stuff. But all this is I took a smaller little round piece there, and I'm trying to get those pieces to fold and be automatically together with very little glue. And you just keep doing that and doing that, and pretty soon you get to a point where it'll hold where it's supposed to go, and then you add your glue. In my case, it was going really well, so I skipped right to the super glue portion. Made sure that you don't want these to overlap. You want them to actually butt join as best as possible, and if they're cut correctly, and you got the right sort of contour, it'll actually have a nice gentle curve, and it will look okay. Which these end up looking pretty good. So I'm just holding it in place while the glue dries for a split second there, and make sure you don't glue yourself to the part. and then you start doing some more shaping. And the idea again is to just very carefully get it into place. It isn't a race, so you can take your time. And then I sort of squeeze it, and I'm trying to get it so that it will be a nice flat spot that will go over that balsa former essentially with ease. But here I'm just making sure that those tulips are together and that they look half decent. And then make sure the opening looks good, because as you start folding these things together, it'll start to change shape a little bit. So you got to make sure that you still have nice curves that you want. You don't want anything abrupt. This is supposed to be a streamlined shell, and so if you don't do that, it's not going to look good. But keep playing with it. Keep playing with it. These are handed, by the way. The part you can see underneath, that's the lighter color that doesn't have the models on it. That goes on the bottom side. So just make sure you keep track which one is which. If you're not going to repaint it like I did, I suppose. Well, no, they are different holes. The holes are slightly different. So make sure you keep that printed side down. So here I am test fitting it, and I'm getting close. But I noticed that it's still not quite there. It's better than the kit part by a mile, but there's still a problem. So what I decided to do, the length is okay. The length is going to be good. It'll look pretty good. But what I decided to do was do something not really drastic, but just something you got to do. I shaved off those little pieces that hold my hinge. Not to the hinge, so it's still there and still strong. But if I shave those off on either side and even take a little bit of the butt of the gun off, as you'll see, that's just enough to make it so that it will then, the cover will then connect and go all the way down to either side. It doesn't take much. You're talking about, 72nd of an inch here, a little bit of a sanding this curve there. And I could have sanded, there I'm taking off part of the gun a little bit there, just to make it so that it'll fold over nicely. And again, that's probably because that teardrop shape is a piece of 1/16 balsa, so it's taller than it's supposed to be. Going out into the slipstream. So I think that's my problem. But you can see now that piece is going to fit pretty well with a little bit of cajoling. Just has to be pushed into place. And it kind of, after you play with it a second, you'll see that suddenly it kind of flops into place here. And there it goes, right there, click. And I check the other side and see that that's going to come together with a little bit of care. And lo and behold, that's going to look just fine. So then since I fit it, I then take my white glue, which will give me time, and I go ahead and put that all the way around the outside edge. There's really no danger of gluing this thing shut because this is all above where it's going to spin, so you don't have to really worry too much. You may be careful, but you don't have to go crazy about it. Anyway, slip this thing back on, and then you start trying to put it together. And the tacky glue is nice because it gives you time, but it also will glue. And this, again, I show most of this. I speed it up a little later, just to show you that what I'm doing is holding the back side so I don't push the fuselage, push it into the other side of the fuselage. And then I'm taking my tweezers or a knife or whatever I have and just slowly pushing it down onto that piece of balsa former. And I just kind of go along the whole piece. I'm trying to do it gently, and basically I get one side done and one side glued. I probably shouldn't have put glue all the way around. Just get it fit and then concentrate on one side. In this case, the top side is especially important because that's the side you're going to see all the time. But you get this thing nice and solid. And all this takes, again, is a little time. And again, I'm showing it just so people know, the kind of stuff you need to do. I do edit some stuff, so don't panic. But, you basically want to make sure one side is good and it's not going to move. And then you come back and play with the other side. Now, in my case, when I did this, it didn't move, which is great. But this piece didn't really glue down. Here I noticed that it's not quite sticking, so I go back and hit it with the handle there. And I'm noticing that my glue basically is not drying, so I ended up using some super glue on here. And this turned out to help. Just putting it down and then squeezing it onto that wood, pushing it down, and the super glue tacks it pretty quick. and then you have a nice edge. The top side looks good, and so I'm just now fixing the bottom. And the bottom, you want it as flush as you can, um, but the top is the side that people are going to see. So there you go. In fact, the other side that I did previously isn't as good as this side, but that's a first because usually what I film is worse than what I did before. But anyway, making sure that this is down and tight and solid, and you just go back and forth. You be careful, don't put crimps in it because you don't want it to look that way. And it was a piece of metal that would have been, I guess, pounded out. And it might have had little ripples and bumps in it if you looked at it closely, but you still want it to be as smooth as you can. And remember, the reason it looks black and white and funny colors is that I just didn't bother using colored ink on it because it's just going to get painted anyway. And I'm just making sure it moves, and sure enough, there it is, moving back and forth. The barbette still functions, and that still goes up and down, back and forth, I guess, as it were. And again, they're probably, if you look carefully, and partially because the barrel inside the fuselage might be a little long, they're a little proud of the fuselage, and they're out probably a little bit out of scale, but not enough for me to lose sleep over it. I think it looks pretty dang nice. And once those, and I was really thinking they wouldn't fit at all, and they actually fit just fine. I had to enlarge them, but that's not the kit's fault. I think that's my fault. Now the interior, notice what I've done with that is spray it a real dark blackish looking color, and then I hit it with a lighter color of a light gray, just using the airbrush kind of shooting straight down. And what that did was pick up some top little bits, but not the corners. So not in the recesses. So it actually lightened up pieces like the seat and tops of boxes and things. Now I'm going to try to do is I'm going to use this little concoction that a really good modeler, his name is Spencer Pollard, makes great plastic models, and he uses 50-50 water and future floor wax, and then mixes whatever Tamiya acrylic paint in there he wants to make a wash. So in here, I put a little line down on or actually I pour in a little bit of this acrylic floor wax, which this is Pledge, but essentially it's the old Future that maybe you've heard of. It's the same stuff, I think. I use this on my plastic models all the time. So put that in, and then 50% water. And so I just make sure that I draw a little line so that I know where it is, so that I can put twice as much, another volume of water in there out of my Simon's Cat mug. Simon's Cat, great comic strip if you haven't, or a great comic on the internet if you haven't seen Simon's Cat. If you have cats, you'll be rolling in the aisles. Mix this up a little bit, and then go ahead and I take, in this case, a brush, and I just add black and brown to it to just make a muddy color. And the idea is I'm going to take this and just paint it over all of the details in the interior, and it should fall into recesses, and it should give me some dark shadows and around some of the pieces that are proud of the background, and should look really cool. Now, in retrospect, or in the end, when you look at this, you're going to see that you can't really see much happening because the dang thing is so dark anyway. This Germanic dark blackish gray is kind of accurate. It's just that it's too dark. I should have just used some poetic license and made it considerably lighter, because then these washes would actually have an effect. I do put this over everything, and that also makes everything, since there's Future floor wax in there, it kind of makes it a little shiny, fills up pores. So it made it, sort of prepped it nice for the stuff I was going to do later. But, in retrospect, this wasn't such a good idea. It didn't really, I can't tell that it did anything. And now I'm just trying to get the right mix. You put in more pigment or less pigment, depending on what you're doing. In my case, I kept putting in more because I couldn't see a difference. But again, that's because I'm a moron and I'm doing a black wash, a dark wash over a dark background. So you're not going to see anything miraculous. But I dutifully went through it, again, thinking that it would also help for starting to get my, getting ready to put my instruments in. Now, the astute of you will notice that a lot of the pieces I put in the cockpit are put in with that that white glue, that tacky glue. If you're careful with this wash, if you don't sit there and scrub it, nothing will happen. But be aware that it will, I notice, soften things once in a while. I did lose like one or two instruments that had to re-put on, reattach. Nothing that made it so that it didn't work or anything. But um, just be aware of that because it isn't all plastic. Most of this, there are plastic bits in this interior here and there, but 90% of it, I'd say, is paper. And so, and it's glued in, and even some of the plastic is glued in. The plastic to paper joints are all glued in with the tacky glue. So this will soften things. It'll run real easy and capillary action and get between things, and it will loosen things once in a while. So just be aware. But what's cool about this technique is if you had a lighter color, you could really see what was going on. You kind of put it on ham-handedly. In fact, the messier you are, the better. And it sort of wicks into the correct little places where it's supposed to go. And when it dries, you have a pretty subtle effect of what a nice wash is supposed to be. Um, so I like what it does in the end. But again, this is a poor example of how it works. I'll try something later sometime on a model and show you that it does work. I'll do like a nice, RAF interior or something. But I've gone over the whole thing, all the walls, all the instruments, the seats, and there you have it. Now, what I did was I went back and I found a bunch of my Merrick and a couple other designs that had 1/33 instrument panels. And I made a compilation of those, and I started cutting out instruments that to me looked interesting. Um, and the idea is I'm cutting these out bit by bit, piece by piece, and I'm just putting a little dot of glue where my instrument face is supposed to go, and then I grab my X-Acto blade and a little spit, pick up my instrument, and pop it onto the glue. And you just do this, it goes pretty fast if you find enough little instruments and you just cut out a bunch of them. These are not accurate. They're not, I don't know which instrument's supposed to go where. Sadly, I'm not a real pilot. But there are some instruments back there that I set up for the rear gunner. And that, again, were suggested in the kit, but they were just drawn on. These look a little better. Then I took, once everything was dry, I took this stuff. This is Tester's Window Maker. It's called. I use it on models, on plastic models a lot to fill in windows, like in bombers that are like, little tiny windows in 1/72 scale especially. It's nice on a fuselage or something. And it comes out white but dries, clings and then dries clear over time. And the idea is that I was hoping that this would look like glass when it's done. And sure enough, it does. So there's the interior. I've gone in and done some yellow and red and blue highlights. I've done some dry brushing as well with the lighter color of the gray. So I mixed this gray rubberish color with white. And I've gone through and dry brushed again very lightly because as you do this, you might pull something off because again, this isn't a plastic model. But if you're delicate, it works fine. And if something falls off, you put it in there. So you can see that the dark color is actually, I think, pretty accurate, but shoot, I should have done it lighter than this. I'm not going to redo it. It's fine, but I learned my lesson. I probably should cheat and just make it lighter because then you could see the effects better. But it looks all right. It doesn't look too bad. Last thing I needed was to take some Scotch tape and make some seat belts. So I do this all the time with plastic models too. There's no need to go out and buy seat belts unless you're really worried about absolute fidelity and trying to make a functional seatbelt that buckles and tarnishes and stuff. I'm not worried about that. I want a hint that they're there. And paper or Scotch tape make great harnesses because it's already self-sticking, and you can make it lay a certain way, and you can make it drape it. So it's actually really cool. So what we do is, you see the rear gunner, I already finished him, but I'm doing the front. And you basically just methodically put these in, but they don't take long. They're not hard to do, and they're actually kind of fun to do. Look at some pictures of what things look like. In my case, I didn't bother, I'm guessing. But, what you want to do is not put them down just up and down like you painted a line down the seat. So you put this behind the seat somewhere. again, I don't know if that's accurate, if the German harnesses were different. Maybe they had hooks on them or something. But I'm just trying to get a couple of these pieces in here so that they will um, look like seat belts, when they're done, which they do. You can even, and I might do this later, give these the tape a little wash with some light brown or something to give it a slight little bit of stippling color on it. You could even take a pin and stick it in and make little holes. I didn't bother doing that this time. This is going to be under a canopy with pretty thick frames. Um, Here I'm making sure, I'm trying to think about how long do they have to be, and I just cut them off with my little skizzers to where I think they're going to be. And then the fun part is taking these things and kind of forming them. So I get this other one, I figure out kind of where it's going to be, cut it off as well. And then the leftovers, I use those to do the lap belts. So I can just leave those there. They're the same thickness. They're fine. But yeah, these are nice because it's kind of fun to grab them and twist them around, and you just don't want them to go straight. You want them to sort of, how would they be left in there? You take them off. You wouldn't be all that careful. Maybe the mechanic would throw them back into the seat, but I doubt unless you were on like a standby and you were going to scramble, then they'd probably be set up in such a way you could jump in and not get involved and hung up on them. But after a mission and barely surviving a few runs on a bomber box, I doubt you're going to take the time to tidy these up like Mr. Rogers. So I put them in and kind of twist them and roll them on top of each other just to where in your imagination they would look. And it's actually quite satisfying when they're done. Now I take some of my really thin, I think 1/2 millimeter fuse wire that's bendy, straighten it out, and then I take my tweezers and I start cutting little buckles and pieces that are metal. Now, on the German ones anyway, they sort of have a triangular buckle, at least what I've seen in pictures seems to be that there's sort of the part that comes over your shoulders, there's a triangular buckle at the end. So I'm just forming a little triangle that's approximately, I think, the right size. Again, if you measure it and you look at 1/33 scale, this is probably overscale. But on the piece of tape, which again isn't a real seatbelt, it looks really cool. It looks just fine. So there's no reason to worry about that. So I bend these triangular ones and just play with them to make sure they look pretty close to being a nice straight triangle. And then when you're ready, you grab them, you put a little tacky glue on them, and then you just pop them on the end of the belt. And again, these are for the shoulder belts as I'm putting them in here. And they're kind of neat. You can dangle them over the seat. You can do lots of stuff. And they really add a lot of interest to the interior. Because again, especially this one, the interior is black, basically. It's very dark. So it's nice to have little bits of red and little bits of this metal and the tape. It does lighten things up and make it look more interesting. So here I'm cutting the other one into a little triangle, making sure it is ready to go. And just kind of, you cut them, and after you do it a little bit, you realize you know how to grab them, how to make them just so. It just takes a little time. And then here, I grab this little guy and I put it on the other side. And now the two little triangular hooks are in. And again, these are not 100% fidelity to scale, but they certainly will look like somebody worked hard and made an interior. And remember, this sucker is basically from scratch, so it's fun to do stuff like that. I mean, the interior of an airplane or a tank or a ship, you think about it, even if you can't see all the stuff from the outside, it's important because it's what made it work. Now, part of the way up the shoulder belts, I put a little horizontal piece of tape to sort of mimic. If you look at these real ones, I guess there's a second layer of belt, and there's places what I end up doing there is put a little square buckle on each of those. I put one on one side and just make sure it looks pretty good. I grab another little piece and put it on the other side, and ultimately, like I said, I don't show this, but I put a little piece of a little square buckle hanging down those pieces. Those are sort of to mimic sort of adjustments like a pair of suspenders would have, um, or a seat belt for an airplane. Now I'm putting on the leftover tape, and I'm using the waist belts, trying to get them in place. And again, I just put them so where I think they should supposed to go on either side, where they're supposed to go on either side, cut them, and then place them in a relaxed fashion onto the seat. And again, they're self-sticking. You don't have to pay for adhesive seat belts and things that you buy at the hobby store or online. You just use tape, and it works really well, and it's really cheap. The buckle that goes on those, just to make them look different, I try to make these basically square as opposed to triangular. So the ones that go on the around the lap, I make them square. So I'm just bending these guys into little squares and cutting them. And once you cut them, this fuse wire is wonderful to work with. It's almost too soft at times, but what you can do is hold things very carefully, like with my index finger, and use the knife to very gently prod things into the right shape. And you know, you buy some of this on Amazon or something, you'll have a lifetime supply. But when you get it to just about a nice square, then you go ahead and you put it on the lap belt ends. That way it sort of signifies that they're two different things. And when you look at it, you think, oh, wow, there's, you know, those must connect, and that's how it's going to go together. And again, you could spend more time and make them even more realistic if you wish. But in my case, I think this is going to be just fine. So, putting on the other one, just didn't show forming it, but putting on the other side. And again, the tacky glue is awesome because you just plop it in there, and it might look funny, but it dries clear, and you can't see it, and they're connected. They're not going anywhere. So, you know, and there's the rear seat. You see the rear seat, he's ready to go. Looks pretty cool. I like it. Not bad at all. And the interior is, you know, sufficiently brushed and ready to go. So it's basically done. Trying to give you a good look at it. It's hard to tell. You can see how dark it is, and you can see some of the little highlights I've added in the dry brushing. If you look carefully, you can see edges of boxes that are hit, and it's lightened in places. I could put some scuff marks. Maybe I'll put some silver chips in with a Prismacolor pencil or something, or maybe some silver paint here and there. You know, the more you dry brush, you can get things look muddy, but you can just, you know, you make lighter and lighter colors, and the last one you can use can be pure white or maybe silver. But you can see all the stuff in there, and there's all the little gadgetry behind the gunner. All I need is to make now, there's a pipe that goes across where the gunner sits in front of those instruments, and there'll be some wire on it and a handle that's going to control his barbettes. So I want to get this part done, then I can add that part as the sort of the last piece. But there it is. Overall, that was a good day's work. Guns are ready. Cockpit is done.